The rain in Seoul didn't fall, it punished. Eunice stood shivering outside the iron gates of the Blackwood estate. She shouldn't be here. A black girl from a quiet neighborhood had no business at the doorstep of the most feared man in South Korea. But her brother's life was measured in hours, not days. She slipped through the gap in the fence she'd scouted for 3 nights. The guards were distracted by a shift change. Heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she sprinted toward the side entrance. The interior of the mansion was silent, smelling of expensive sandalwood and cold stone. She rounded a corner and stopped dead. At the end of the hall, framed by the moonlight of a floor-to-ceiling window, stood Kant Ji-hoon. He was tall, his suit tailored so sharply it looked like armor. He was cleaning a small silver blade. Eunice didn't run, she stepped into the light. "Mr. Kang." He didn't turn. "You have 5 seconds to explain why you shouldn't be buried in the garden." "I don't want money," Eunice whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "I need your protection. I'll give you anything in return." Ji-hoon turned, his eyes cold as glass. But as his gaze landed on her, really landed on her, the knife slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The man who never flinched, the man who had seen death 1,000 times, froze completely. For a full minute, neither of them moved. Ji-hoon's breath hitched. In the dim light, Eunice's skin looked like polished mahogany against the white walls, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and defiance. Ji-hoon felt a phantom pain in his chest. He had dreamt of a face like hers, someone who looked like they belonged to a world he had long ago destroyed. He wasn't supposed to feel anything, yet the air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "Who sent you?" he managed to grit out, his voice raspier than usual. "No one," Eunice said, taking a step forward. "My brother. He stole from the Namsun gang. They're going to kill him tonight. I heard you hate them. I heard you're the only one they fear." Ji-hoon finally moved, but it wasn't to strike her. He walked toward her slowly, like a predator unsure of its prey. He stopped just inches away, the heat from his body radiating through his expensive wool coat. He reached out, his long fingers hovering just near her jawline, not quite touching. "You came to a monster to save him from a ghost?" Ji-hoon asked, a dark smirk finally playing on his lips. "Do you have any idea what the price of my help is, Eunice?" Her name on his tongue sounded like a secret. She hadn't even told him her name yet. The silence in the hallway was suffocating. Eunice felt the weight of Ji-hoon's gaze. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, as if he were memorizing every curve of her face. "How do you know my name?" she whispered, her heart racing. Ji-hoon let his hand drop, though he didn't move back. "I make it my business to know everyone who breathes within a 5-mile radius of my home. You've been watching my gates for 3 nights, Eunice. I was waiting to see if you were an assassin or just a fool." "I'm a sister," she snapped, her fear momentarily eclipsed by desperation. "My brother is a fool, yes. He thought he could outrun the Namsun debt, but they have him in a warehouse in Incheon. They told me if I didn't bring them the remaining 10 million won by midnight, they'd send him back to me in pieces." She reached out, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his suit. "I don't have the money, but I know you own the docks. I know you want the Namsun territory. Help me get him back, and I will owe you a debt that never expires." Ji-hoon looked down at her small hand against his sleeve. The contrast was striking, her warmth against his literal and metaphorical cold. No one touched him, no one dared. "A debt that never expires," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "You are promising your life to a man who has no soul left to care for it." Eunice braced herself. She expected him to laugh, to throw her out, or perhaps to demand she leave her clothes at the door. That was the reputation of men like him, transactional and cruel. Instead, Ji-hoon did something that would have shocked his lieutenants to their core. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a sleek black smartphone and pressed a single button. "Min-ho," he said into the line, his eyes never leaving Eunice. "Burn the Namsun warehouse in Incheon. The boy inside, bring him here, alive. If he has a single scratch on him, don't bother coming back." He ended the call and tucked the phone away. You're helping me," Eunice stammered, stunned by the lack of hesitation. "Just like that." "Not just like that," Ji-hoon said. He stepped even closer, his shadow completely engulfing her. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that wasn't from the cold. "The Namsuns are a nuisance I was going to eliminate anyway," he murmured. "But your debt. I won't take your money, Eunice, and I won't take your body as a common whore. From tonight you are mine, you will live in this house, you will eat at my table. You will be the only soft thing in this world of stone. you are my penance. He pulled back, his expression returning to that of the Ice King, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, obsession. Go to the guest suite. The maid will bring you dry clothes, he commanded. Your brother will be here within the hour, but remember, once the gates lock behind him, you belong to the Geum, and more specifically, you belong to me. The guest suite was larger than Eunice's entire apartment. It was filled with gold-leafed furniture, silk sheets, and the haunting scent of expensive lilies. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, Eunice realized she wasn't just a guest, she was a prized acquisition. A silent maid arrived with a stack of clothes, cashmere, silk, and wool in shades of cream and charcoal. Everything was in her exact size. The realization sent a fresh wave of chills through her. Ji-hoon hadn't just been watching her for 3 days, he had been studying her. She showered, trying to scrub the smell of the rain and the Incheon docks off her skin. When she stepped out, she caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked like a different person in the cream-colored silk robe, elegant, fragile, and utterly out of place. A knock at the door startled her. It was Min-ho, Ji-hoon's right-hand man. His face was a mask of professional indifference. Your brother is in the secondary lounge, he said shortly. He is unharmed, the boss is waiting. Eunice didn't wait. She ran down the hall, her bare feet silent on the plush carpets. She burst into the lounge to find her brother Marcus sitting on a velvet sofa. He looked pale, his clothes torn, but he was whole. Eunice, Marcus stood up, his voice cracking. What did you do, those men? They just walked in and took me. They killed everyone else. I did what I had to, she whispered, hugging him tightly. Over Marcus's shoulder, she saw Ji-hoon standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was watching the reunion with an unreadable expression, a mix of fascination and a strange, simmering envy. Ji-hoon set his glass down on the mantel with a sharp clack. The sound made Marcus flinch and pull away from Eunice. He stays in the north wing tonight, Ji-hoon said, his voice cutting through the emotional tension. Tomorrow he will be given a ticket to Brazil. He will stay there, working for one of my subsidiaries until I decide his debt is paid. Brazil, Marcus gasped. I can't just... You can, or you can go back to the warehouse, Ji-hoon interrupted, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. He turned his gaze to Eunice. And you, come with me, we need to discuss the rules of your new life. He led her into his private study, a room lined with ancient books and digital security monitors. He sat behind a desk made of dark obsidian and gestured for her to sit opposite him. Rule number 1, he began, leaning forward. You do not leave this estate without Min-ho or myself. The Nam-sun family lost a lot of men tonight to save your brother. They will look for a way to hurt me. You are now my greatest vulnerability. Eunice swallowed hard. I'm not a target, I'm nobody. You were nobody yesterday, Ji-hoon corrected, his voice dropping to a low growl. Tonight you are the girl for whom Kang Ji-hoon started a gang war. In my world that makes you a queen, or a target. Rule number 2, when we are in public you will act as if you adore me. My enemies must believe that touching you is the same as declaring war on me. And when we're alone, Eunice asked, her voice trembling. Ji-hoon stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped so close she could smell the smoke and sandalwood on his skin. He reached out, his thumb grazing her lower lip. When we are alone, he whispered, you will learn that I am not the hero in your story, Eunice. I am simply the man who kept you for himself. The next morning, the sun bled through the heavy velvet curtains, but the warmth didn't reach Eunice's heart. She found Marcus in the north wing, being packed off by 2 silent men in black suits. Eunice, you don't have to stay, Marcus hissed, grabbing her arm. This guy, he's worse than the people I owed, he's a ghost. People don't even say his name in the streets. I made a deal, Marcus, she said, her voice hollow. Go to Brazil, stay alive, that's all you have to do. As Marcus was ushered into a black SUV, Eunice felt a presence behind her. Ji-hoon was standing on the balcony above, his hands tucked into his pockets. He watched the car disappear down the winding driveway before descending the stairs. He didn't tell you the whole truth, did he? Ji-hoon asked, standing beside her. What truth? Your brother didn't just lose money at a poker table, Ji-hoon said, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was selling information. He tried to sell the Nam-sun's shipping routes to a rival. He wasn't a victim of bad luck, he was a traitor to people who don't believe in mercy. Eunice felt the world tilt. Marcus had told her it was a gambling debt. He had let her walk into a lion's den to save him from a fire he had started himself. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because I want you to know exactly what you sacrificed yourself for, Ji-hoon said, stepping closer. And because I want you to know that from this moment on, the only person you can trust is the man you're afraid of. By evening, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The silence was replaced by the frantic energy of tailors and stylists. The chairman is hosting a gala tonight, Min-ho explained as he dropped a heavy garment bag onto Eunice's bed. Every major family in Seoul will be there. You are to be at the boss's side. Do not speak unless he speaks to you. Inside the bag was a dress that looked like it had been dipped in blood. It was a deep, shimmering crimson silk, floor-length with a slit that climbed high up her thigh. When Eunice put it on, the contrast against her dark skin was breathtaking. She looked like a flame in a dark room. When she descended the grand staircase, Ji-hoon was waiting at the bottom. For the second time since they met, he froze. His hand, usually steady enough to aim a pulseless shot, tightened around the head of his cane. You look, he struggled for the word, his jaw tightening. Dangerous. Is that a compliment? Eunice asked, her confidence flickering. In my world it's the only one that matters, he replied. He offered his arm, his muscles taut as iron. As they stepped into the limousine, the air between them was electric. Ji-hoon reached into a small velvet box and pulled out a necklace, a single massive teardrop diamond on a platinum chain. He leaned in to fasten it around her neck, his cool fingers lingering on the nape of her neck. Tonight everyone will look at you, he whispered against her skin. They will wonder who you are, they will try to find a weakness in your eyes, do not let them. You are mine, Eunice, remember that and no one can touch you. The car pulled up to a glittering skyscraper in Gangnam. As the doors opened to a swarm of paparazzi and cold-eyed men in suits, Eunice realized she wasn't just entering a party. She was entering a battlefield. The gala was a sea of false smiles and hidden daggers. Every eye in the room, from the elderly chairmen of shipping empires to their predatory sons, snapped to the entrance when Ji-hoon arrived. But the shock wasn't just his presence, it was the woman on his arm. Eunice felt the weight of their judgment. She was the only black woman in a room full of elite Koreans, standing tall in a dress the color of a heartbeat. She felt like an outsider, but Ji-hoon's grip on her waist was a territorial claim that no one dared challenge. Ji-hoon, a voice boomed. A man with a scarred cheek and a cruel grin approached. It was Choi, the leader of the Namsun remnants. I didn't know you had a taste for imported jewels. Eunice felt Ji-hoon's body turn to stone. The air around them dropped 10 degrees. She isn't jewelry, Choi, Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, lethal silk. She is the reason your warehouse is a pile of ash. I'd be careful with your tongue. I might decide I want your tongue to match your scarred face. Choi laughed, but it was hollow. He stepped closer to Eunice, his eyes traveling down her body with a disgusting slowness. Is she worth a war, Kang? She looks like she'd break if I just. Before Choi could finish, Ji-hoon's hand was a blur. He didn't pull a gun. He grabbed a crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter and smashed it against the edge of a table. In one fluid motion, he held the jagged stem to Choi's throat, drawing a thin line of red. The room went silent, music stopped. Guards reached for their jackets. Touch her, Ji-hoon whispered, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, dark joy, and I will feed your heart to the dogs in front of your mother. The drive back to the estate was silent, but the air was thick with the scent of ozone and adrenaline. Eunice sat as far from Ji-hoon as the seat allowed, her hands trembling in her lap. She had seen him kill with words, but the raw, animalistic violence in his eyes at the gala had terrified her. When they reached the mansion, Ji-hoon didn't go to his office. He went to the balcony of the library, staring out at the dark Seoul skyline. Eunice followed him, driven by a strange mix of fear and curiosity. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. You put yourself in danger for me. Ji-hoon didn't turn around. He began to unbutton his waistcoat, his movements jerky. They think because I am young I am soft. They think because I want you I am weak. He pulled his shirt off, discarding it on the floor. Eunice gasped. His back was a map of tragedy. Long, jagged scars crisscrossed his skin, burns, blade marks, and what looked like old bullet wounds. Who did that to you? She breathed, her hand moving instinctively toward his back before she caught herself. My father, Ji-hoon said, finally turning to face her. The moonlight caught the moisture in his eyes, not tears but a simmering rage. He wanted to make sure I never felt pain again by giving me more than I could handle. He taught me that everything you love is a target. He stepped toward her, his bare chest heaving. I froze when I saw you in that hallway, Eunice, because for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than hate. And that makes you the most dangerous thing in this house. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he tucked a lock of her hair behind her ear. Do you hate me yet? Eunice looked at the scars, then into his broken, beautiful eyes. I think, she whispered, I'm starting to understand you. The tension in the library was a physical weight. Eunice looked at the jagged scar near Ji-hoon's shoulder blade. It was red and angry, as if the memory of the wound was still burning. Without thinking, her medical training took over, overriding her fear. You're bleeding, she said, her voice steadier now. The confrontation with Choi had reopened an old laceration on his shoulder. Sit down, please. Ji-hoon looked ready to argue, his jaw set in a hard line, but the softness in her eyes did what no rival's bullet could, it made him yield. He sat on the edge of the leather sofa, his broad shoulders hunched. Eunice returned with a first aid kit. As she cleaned the wound with antiseptic, she felt the ripple of his muscles beneath her fingertips. He was like a statue brought to life, vibrating with a suppressed energy. Why do you do this? She asked quietly, dabbing the skin. Live like this, you have enough money to walk away. In my world, walking away is just another word for suicide, he grunted, his breath hitching as she pressed the gauze. Eunice leaned in closer to bandage the area, her chest nearly brushing his arm. The scent of him, expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of blood, made her dizzy. Suddenly, Ji-hoon's hand shot out, grasping her wrist. It wasn't violent, but it was firm. He pulled her hand away from his shoulder and looked up at her. The Ice King persona was gone, replaced by a raw, starving hunger. You are too kind for this house, Eunice. It will ruin you. Maybe, she whispered, her heart drumming against her ribs. Or maybe I'm the only one who isn't afraid of the ruin. He didn't pull her closer, but he didn't let go. For a heartbeat, the distance between them vanished, the air charged with a spark that promised both salvation and destruction. The morning after the gala brought a cold reality. While Eunice was beginning to see the man behind the monster's enemies were busy. Ji-hoon was in a high-stakes meeting in the city, leaving Eunice under the watch of a skeleton crew. She was in the garden, trying to find a moment of peace when she noticed Min-ho, the man Ji-hoon trusted most, standing by the perimeter wall, speaking low into a burner phone. The girl is the key, Min-ho whispered, his back to her. He's distracted. If you move now, you can take her while he's at the docks. He won't have the backup to stop you. Eunice's blood turned to ice. She tried to retreat toward the house, but her foot snapped a dry twig. Min-ho spun around. His eyes, usually so professional, were now predatory. He didn't look like a loyal soldier. He looked like a man who had finally found a price high enough to sell his soul. Eunice, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he folded the phone. You shouldn't be out here. It's dangerous for a girl like you. I heard you, she said, backing away. Ji-hoon will kill you for this. Ji-hoon is a man blinded by a pretty face, Min-ho sneered, stepping toward her. The Namsuns offered me half of Seoul to hand you over. They don't want to kill him, they want to break him. And you are the hammer. Before she could scream, a black van burst through the side gate, the screech of tires echoing through the courtyard. Min-ho lunged for her, and for the first time in her life, Eunice realized that being claimed by a Mafia boss meant she was no longer a person. She was the ultimate prize in a deadly game. The van sped away, the scent of burnt rubber lingering in the air. Inside, Eunice was shoved onto the floor, her wrists bound with zip ties that bit into her skin. Min-ho sat across from her, his face a cold mask. He didn't look at her, he looked at his watch. Back at the estate, Ji-hoon returned earlier than expected. He had cut the meeting short, an uneasy feeling gnawing at his gut, a feeling he hadn't felt since he was a child. He called for Eunice as he entered the foyer, but only silence answered him. He found the garden first. He saw the first aid kit she had left on the bench and the single, crushed lily where the struggle had happened. Then he saw the security feed on his phone, wiped clean for the last 10 minutes. Min-ho, he whispered, the name tasting like poison. He didn't scream, he didn't break furniture. Instead, a terrifying stillness settled over him. He pulled his gun from his holster and checked the magazine with a mechanical precision. His hands weren't shaking, but his eyes were voids of pure, focused rage. Boss, a junior guard, ran up, trembling. We found Min-ho's burner. He's headed for the old shipyard. The Namsuns are there. Ji-hoon didn't wait for his men. He climbed into his black sedan, the engine roaring like a beast. If they touch a hair on her head, he muttered to the empty car. I will turn this city into a graveyard. The shipyard was a skeleton of rusted metal and salt air. Eunice was pushed into a chair in the center of an empty warehouse. Choi. The man from the gala was waiting. He leaned down, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes. You're even prettier when you're terrified, Choi mocked, reaching out to stroke her cheek. Eunice spit at him. He laughed, wiping his face. Ji-hoon is coming for you. He's coming alone because he's a fool. And when he gets here, he's going to watch you die before I take his head. Suddenly, the heavy iron doors of the warehouse didn't just open. They were blown off their hinges. The sound of gunfire was deafening. Ji-hoon didn't use cover. He walked into the warehouse like a god of war, a pistol in each hand, firing with a lethal, rhythmic accuracy. He moved through the Namsun guards like they were shadows. Ji-hoon, stop, Choi yelled, grabbing Eunice and holding a knife to her throat. One more step and she bleeds. Ji-hoon stopped 10 feet away. He was covered in blood that wasn't his. His suit was ruined, but his gaze was locked on Eunice. He saw the bruise forming on her arm where Min-ho had grabbed her. Choi, Ji-hoon said, his voice so quiet it was more frightening than the gunshots. You have 30 seconds to let her go. If you do, I will kill you quickly. If you don't, I will make sure you stay alive for a very, very long time while I show you what pain really is. You're outnumbered, Choi screamed, his hand shaking. I am the only man in this room who has nothing left to lose, Ji-hoon replied. Which makes me the only one you should be afraid of. The tension in the warehouse was a physical cord, stretched to the point of snapping. Choi's knife pressed harder against Eunice's throat, drawing a single, tiny bead of crimson. Ji-hoon didn't blink. In one motion, faster than the human eye could follow, he didn't fire at Choi. He fired at the heavy industrial chain hanging directly above the rival boss. The heavy iron link shattered, dropping a massive steel pulley. Choi lurched back to avoid being crushed, his grip on Eunice loosening for a split second. That was all Ji-hoon needed. He closed the distance in 3 strides, his fist connecting with Choi's jaw with the sound of breaking stone. Eunice fell to the floor, gasping for air as the warehouse erupted into a final, brief chaos. Ji-hoon didn't chase the fleeing guards. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands, the same hands that had just dealt out death, shaking as they reached for her. Eunice, he breathed. He sliced through her zip ties with his pocket knife and pulled her against his chest. He held her so tight she could feel the frantic, ragged beat of his heart against her ear. I have you, I have you. For the first time, Eunice didn't see the Mafia boss or the Ice King. She saw a man who had stared into the abyss of losing her and blinked. Back at the estate, the air was thick with the aftermath of violence. Ji-hoon refused to let the doctors touch him until he knew Eunice was examined. Only when he was satisfied she was physically unharmed did he allow himself to collapse into the chair in his study. He was a mess. A bullet had grazed his ribs and his knuckles were split open. Eunice entered the room quietly, carrying a bowl of warm water and fresh bandages. I told the doctors I would do it, she said softly. Ji-hoon looked up, his eyes weary. You should be running away from me, Eunice. You saw what I am tonight. I killed 6 men to get to you. I saw a man who saved my life, she countered, kneeling between his legs to reach his wounded side. In my world, we don't call that a monster, we call that a protector. As she cleaned the blood from his skin, the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of fear, but of an unspoken confession. Eunice looked up, and before she could look away, Ji-hoon leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. Min-ho is gone, he whispered. The Namsuns are finished, but I realized something in that warehouse. The walls I built to keep the world out, they didn't work, you're already inside. He tilted her chin up, his gaze searching hers. If you stay, the danger will never truly end, but I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone take you again. Eunice reached up, her palm resting against his scarred cheek. Then I guess we'll just have to watch the city burn together. The days following the warehouse raid were unnervingly quiet. A new security detail had been handpicked by Ji-hoon, but they remained invisible, ghosts in the shadows of the estate. The power dynamic between Ji-hoon and Eunice had shifted from captor and captive to something far more intimate and dangerous. One evening they sat in the library, the only room that felt like a sanctuary. Ji-hoon was reviewing ledgers, but his eyes kept drifting to Eunice, who was curled up in an armchair with a medical textbook. You're still studying, he remarked, his voice low. I have exams in 2 months, she said, looking up. I don't plan on being a Mafia consort forever, Ji-hoon. He closed his ledger and walked over, standing behind her chair. He leaned down, his breath warm against her hair. Then let's make a pact. You finish your degree, I will fund the best clinic in Seoul and you will run it. But in return you stay here under my roof in my life. Is that a business proposal or a request? She asked, her heart skipping a beat. It's a necessity, he murmured. I've spent 34 years thinking I was untouchable because I had nothing to love. Now that I have you, I am vulnerable. I need you where I can see you. Eunice reached back, entwining her fingers with his. As long as you don't keep me in a cage, Ji-hoon, I'm a partner, not a pet. I would never mistake you for a pet, Eunice, he said, kissing the top of her head. Pets don't have the power to destroy me, you do. The pact was tested sooner than expected. To maintain appearances and stabilize the underworld after the Namsun's fall, Ji-hoon had to attend a high-level meeting at a luxury hotel. This time, Eunice insisted on going, not as a silent ornament, but as his companion. In the hotel lounge, while Ji-hoon was pulled into a private side room for negotiations, Eunice went to the bar for a water. Eunice, is that really you? She turned to see Leo, a former classmate from her university. He was bright-eyed, wearing a simple lab coat. He was likely there for a medical conference being held in the same hotel. Leo, hi, she said, a genuine smile breaking across her face. It was the first piece of normalcy she'd had in weeks. They began to chat, Leo laughing as he recounted a disastrous chemistry lab they had shared. He reached out, playfully nudging her shoulder. The air in the lounge suddenly turned freezing. Ji-hoon had emerged from the meeting early. He stood 10 feet away, his silhouette dark against the gold-leafed pillars. His eyes weren't on the rival bosses behind him, they were fixed on Leo's hand on Eunice's shoulder. He walked over, his stride slow and predatory. The conversation around them died. Leo, sensing the shift in pressure, took a step back, his smile faltering. Eunice, Ji-hoon said, his voice like a blade being drawn from a scabbard. He didn't look at Leo. It's time to go. Ji-hoon, this is Leo, an old friend from school, Eunice said, sensing the rising heat in his gaze. Ji-hoon finally looked at Leo. It wasn't a look of anger, it was a look of absolute, terrifying dismissal. He was just leaving, Ji-hoon said. He stepped between them, his hand settling heavily and possessively on the small of Eunice's back. Leo paled, realizing exactly who the man in the $5,000 suit was. I have a lecture, nice seeing you, Eunice. He practically ran. In the car, the silence was suffocating. He was just a friend, Ji-hoon, Eunice snapped. You can't scare off everyone from my past. He touched you, Ji-hoon said, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest. And for a second you looked like you belonged in his world, not mine. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a raw, ugly jealousy. I told you, Eunice, I am a monster, and monsters don't like to share their treasures. The argument from the car spilled into the foyer of the mansion. Eunice was tired of the possessiveness, but as she turned to shout back at him, she saw it, the flicker of genuine fear in Ji-hoon's eyes. It wasn't fear of an enemy, it was the fear of losing the only light he had ever allowed into his dark world. You're not a treasure, Ji-hoon, she said, her voice softening. I'm a person, if you keep squeezing you're going to break me. Ji-hoon stopped, his chest heaving. He leaned his head against the cool mahogany door. I don't know how to do this, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. In my world, if you want something, you take it. If you want to keep it, you kill anyone who looks at it. Loving you, it's making me lose my edge. He looked at her, truly vulnerable for the first time. I saw you laughing with him, and I realized he can give you a life of sunlight. I can only give you a life of shadows. Eunice walked over and took his face in her hands. I chose the shadows when I walked into your house, Ji-hoon, but you have to trust me to stay. You can't force me. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. I'm trying, Eunice, I'm trying. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. 2 days later, Ji-hoon insisted on taking Eunice to a private dinner at a secluded restaurant overlooking the Han River. He wanted to prove he could give her a normal date, even if the restaurant was cleared of all other guests and guarded by 10 armed men. The dinner was peaceful. They talked about things other than debts and blood, her favorite childhood memories in London, his hidden love for classical piano. For a moment, they were just a man in his 30s and a woman in her 20s falling in love. Look at the moon, Eunice said, pointing toward the window. As Ji-hoon turned to look, a small red dot appeared on the white tablecloth, dancing toward Eunice's chest. Jae-hoon's instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He lunged across the table, his body a shield, tackling Eunice to the floor just as the reinforced glass shattered. Thwip! A high-velocity round embedded itself into the chair where Eunice's head had been a second before. Stay down, Jae-hoon roared. The restaurant erupted. His guards returned fire toward the dark tree lane across the street. Jae-hoon pulled a compact submachine gun from beneath his chair, a weapon he had hidden there just in case. He stayed over her, his body covering hers completely. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for blood. "I'm okay," she gasped, her ears ringing from the crash of the glass. "Min-ho," Jae-hoon hissed into his comms. "I thought you said the snipers were cleared. Find him, bring me his hands." He looked down at Eunice, and the tenderness from minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous focus. The Ice King was back, but this time he wasn't just protecting his territory, he was protecting his heart. The restaurant was a wreckage of broken crystal and splintered wood. Jae-hoon's men were sweeping the perimeter, but the shooter had been a professional, a ghost in the night. Jae-hoon was a whirlwind of controlled fury, barking orders that sounded like death sentences. "We go to the safe house," Jae-hoon commanded, his hand gripping Eunice's arm so tightly his knuckles were white. "No," Eunice said, pulling back. "They expect you to go to a safe house, that's where they'll trap you." As they reached the armored SUV, Eunice spotted a glint of metal underneath the chassis. Her medical eyes, trained to spot the smallest anomalies, caught the faint rhythmic blinking of a red light. "Jae-hoon, stop." She lunged forward, grabbing his coat and pulling him back just as he reached for the door handle. She didn't think about the danger, she only thought about the man who had just used his body as a shield for hers. She shoved him toward the stone fountain in the center of the driveway. An explosion rocked the night. The SUV turned into a fireball, the shockwave throwing them both into the water of the fountain. Eunice coughed, her lungs burning with smoke. She looked over to see Jae-hoon slumped against the marble, a piece of shrapnel embedded in his thigh. He was conscious but dazed. You pushed me," he rasped, looking at her with an expression of pure disbelief. "You could have been killed." "Then we'd be even," she whispered, already ripping her silk shawl to tie a tourniquet around his leg. For the first time, the Mafia boss looked at her not as a prize to be kept, but as a force to be reckoned with. They retreated to a secondary location, a high-rise apartment in Gangnam that no one, not even Min-ho, had known about. As Eunice stitched the wound in Jae-hoon's leg, the room was silent except for the sound of the rain against the glass. Jae-hoon's phone buzzed. It was an encrypted file from his intelligence team in Brazil. He looked at it, his face darkening until he looked like a storm cloud. "What is it?" Eunice asked, knotting the thread. "Your brother," Jae-hoon said, his voice cold. "He didn't just sell information to the Namsuns, Eunice. He was the one who gave them the coordinates for the restaurant tonight." Eunice felt the world go cold. "No, Marcus wouldn't. I saved him, you saved him." "He didn't want to be saved, he wanted to be the boss," Jae-hoon said, handing her the phone. The screen showed a series of transfers. Marcus had been paid $5 million to set up the hit. He had traded his sister's life for a chance to sit on a throne he hadn't earned. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Eunice fell back into a chair, the air leaving her lungs. Every sacrifice she had made, offering herself to Jae-hoon, entering this world of blood, had been based on a lie. Jae-hoon stood up despite his injury and walked over to her. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He simply stood in front of her, offering his hand. "I have a plane waiting," he said quietly. "I can send you anywhere in the world, new identity, enough money to never work again. You can leave this blood behind. You can leave me behind." Eunice looked at his hand, then up into his eyes. She saw the pain he was hiding, the pain of being willing to let her go just to keep her safe. The silence in the penthouse was heavy with the scent of rain and antiseptic. Eunice looked at the phone, the evidence of Marcus's betrayal burning into her retinas. Her own blood, her own flesh, had sold her to the highest bidder. She looked at Jae-hoon's outstretched hand. This was the moment she could take her freedom. She could go back to being a student, a girl whose biggest worry was a pharmacology exam. "If I leave," she whispered, her voice cracking, "what happens to you?" Jae-hoon's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "I go back to being a ghost. I finish the war, and I live with the knowledge that you are breathing somewhere where the air doesn't smell like gunpowder." Eunice stood up, She didn't take his hand to say goodbye. Instead, she stepped into his space, her eyes burning with a new, hardened resolve. Marcus thinks I'm a victim, she said. He thinks I'm a bargaining chip. He doesn't realize that by trying to kill you. He tried to kill the only person who actually cared if I lived or died. She looked at the stitching on Ji-hoon's leg. I'm not going to Brazil and I'm not going to hide. My brother made his choice. Now I'm making mine. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't send me away, show me how to end this. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dark alleyway. It happened at a private hangar at Incheon Airport. Marcus was waiting for his final payout, a suitcase of cash that would buy his silence and his new life. He didn't know that the courier coming to meet him was the sister he had left for dead. A black sedan pulled into the hangar. Marcus stepped forward, a smug grin on his face. Is it done? Is the Ice King dead? The back door opened and Eunice stepped out. She was wearing the charcoal wool coat Ji-hoon had given her on her first night. Her face was a mask of cold stone. Behind her, Ji-hoon emerged, leaning slightly on his cane, his eyes fixed on Marcus like a predator watching a wounded rabbit. Marcus's face drained of color. Eunice, I thought. You thought you could sell me twice? Eunice asked, walking toward him. The guards at the hangar, men who had once served the Namsuns, were now on their knees, Ji-hoon's snipers having already secured the rafters. I did it for us, Marcus screamed, backing away. We could have been rich, you could have been out from under his thumb. I was never under his thumb, Marcus, Eunice said, stopping inches from him. I was at his side, you didn't try to free me, you tried to orphan me. She looked back at Ji-hoon. For weeks she had feared his violence. But now, as she looked at her brother's cowardice, she realized that Ji-hoon's violence was at least honest. What do you want to do with him? Ji-hoon asked, his voice a low vibration in the cold air. The decision was hers, it was her test of fire. Eunice looked at Marcus for a long time. She saw the boy she had protected from bullies, the brother she had worked 3 jobs to support. That boy was gone. Give him the money, Eunice said. Marcus blinked, hope springing in his eyes. Eunice, thank you, I knew you'd. Give him the money, she repeated, her voice turning to ice. And put him on a boat to the most remote island in the South Pacific. If he ever touches land with a cell tower, if he ever speaks my name again, or if he ever sets foot in Korea. You have my permission to do what you do best, Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon nodded slowly, a dark smirk of pride touching his lips. He signaled his men, who dragged a screaming Marcus toward the docks. The hangar grew quiet. The sun began to rise over the runway, casting long, golden shadows across the concrete. Ji-hoon walked over to Eunice, wrapping his arm around her waist to support her. You're a terrifying woman, Eunice, he murmured against her temple. I learned from the best, she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. 6 months later, the Geum syndicate was no longer a shadow in the streets. It was a legitimate empire, with a new medical wing at the city's largest hospital and a scholarship fund for minority students. At the head of the table sat Ji-hoon, his eyes no longer cold but sharp. And beside him sat Eunice, the girl who had walked in asking for help and stayed to rule. The world still whispered about the Black Queen and the Ice King, but no one dared to move against them. Because everyone knew that while the king would kill for his throne, he would burn the entire world for his queen. Question for my listeners. If your brother betrayed you like Marcus did, would you have been as merciful as Eunice, or would you have let Ji-hoon handle it his way? Drop a comment if you think Ji-hoon made the right choice letting Eunice handle Marcus.